The second book in the Foundation series was every bit as good as the first, if not better. It's called For the Foundation, and in this one, Harry Seldon creates his Seldon plan. Basically, he finishes psychohistory as far as we can see, and he's ready to create the Foundation. The angle I'm taking in this review is how an author, by writing out their own literary world, makes sense of the real world around themselves. An important point in my reading experience that I have to mention is that I found a copy of Foundation in Spanish, and that's the one I read. And I was wondering, will it change my reading experience? Will the terminology be different in case I have to take notes in English? Maybe it's like working with two versions of the same book that I have to do a review in English. Will I be missing some of the terminology? But I have to say that wasn't the case. The more I got into my reading, the more used to this other language I got. And I was able to learn a bunch of vocabulary words just out of context without even having to look them up. So in case you do speak more than one language, I would recommend from time to time reading a book in other languages to upkeep the languages you already know. With the first book review, I made a big deal how Foundation is a sci-fi book, but also a mystery book. And I wanted to confirm, in case you're still interested in the mystery aspect, that it is very much still a mystery book. The mystery continues. One with Doris questioning everybody when she gets suspicious, who is after her husband, and trying to figure out. It's like a whodunit, almost like a Scooby-Doo mystery, and unmasking in the end. And the other, I would say, Harry Seldon standing trial for these street fights that he's been caught up in as an old man, which is kind of funny. And him trying to argue with the judge to prove his innocence. Besides being a work in mystery, Foundation is also very much a work of sociology, and it's very interesting to me as a writer to see all these different writers. We seem to have a primary interest, which is writing, and then a secondary one. In my case, it's philosophy, and it's clear in the case of Isaac Asimov that it's sociology. So he's basically someone looking around society and trying to figure out how all of it works. One is class struggle. As in the first book, it's still present and at the forefront. And a good example would be Dal, this district that's poor. In many ways, it's kept down by the system. And as a result, they also have crime. There's maybe a lot of trash in the streets, fighting in the streets, the people are rougher, and there's commentary. When you're around rough people, no matter how soft you are yourself, you'll also have to get rougher too, which struck me pretty hard. In a certain sense, that's been partly my experience in life. Well, you can see I sit here and I try to speak well. Okay, but not everything is like that in the world. And if you get too soft, maybe your hands are too clean, other people are going to knock you down and you'll have to get a little rough with them. So I wonder if that's the experience of other people. If you could write in the comments, that would be really interesting. And there's actually another point that struck me. It was that technology can actually regress. It was said when Seldon went to the doctor for sciatica that in the past, so in their future past, they used to have the technology to just cure it, but now they don't anymore. So how's that possible? Well, it's again attributed to the decadence, that people are no longer interested in doing the best they can. They had this technology, but imagine everybody stopped creating it, and over time it became antique and out of use, defunct, and gone. Well, what a shame, Seldon considers, to lose our progress. We definitely can't do that. We have to keep working toward our ideals. This book is full of existential commentary. Within the span of 2 books now, the first one and the second one, Harry Seldon has gone from about 30 years to about 80 years old. So 50 years, the large part of his life has passed within the span of 2 books. It's very interesting. It's like we think there's so much time, and then all of a sudden we're in the future and the time is gone and we don't know where it went. Imagine like God reading 2 books and a person's life is over. That's how I imagined it for a minute. So with the turning of these pages, we see jumps ahead in time, maybe by a decade from time to time, and we see different versions of the same characters, especially Harry Seldon. At 60 years old, he comments that even though his body has declined, his mind is relatively fresh still, but it's not as agile or creative, it was said, as when he was 30. So there is that decline gradually, mostly with the body but also with the mind. Which actually, again, there's a contrast. When they show him at 80 years old, he seems a lot fresher mentally. It's commented, I would say he's picked up more life experience and wisdom, so in a way he is sharper. He can bring about decisions quicker and better. Besides the aging of the individual, again we have this decadence of society. So with the turning of pages, with those jumps in decades, every time we get a snapshot of a worse society. And I wondered how Isaac Asimov was coming up with these ideas in his times, in the 20th century, when those were some of the best decades. So after World War II, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s were some of the best times in humanity. We can see movies from those periods. The people were a lot happier, it seems, than they are now. And I asked myself what he would think if he were alive today and saw our society. To me, at least, it seems like it was better in the past, maybe like the 2000s, perhaps. I think people were happier then than they are now. And again, I would like to ask the viewers to comment what they think if that's their observation too. And we could also ask if it's a function of aging again. As a person gets older, as it's said in the book, the horizons are no longer so open. They're kind of closer, more narrow, the possibilities are smaller. Could it be that as a person gets older, regardless of how everything is doing outside, they'll always see the past as brighter and better? But in the case of the novels, that's just not true. Empirically, observationally, the society has declined. This would not be a review of Foundation if we did not also talk about psychohistory. It's a fascinating idea to change the future with mathematical equations. It's been described as playing chess. Maybe you make a move and then the whole game around it changes. So you have to also foresee different moves into the future. And it was also described as playing God. Maybe you have a short-term problem and you can figure out a solution, implement it, and everything's better. But because you solved it here, now far into the future you create another bigger problem. So it raises questions. How do we look into the future, and in which ways can we change it? It was also interesting to look at this psychohistory from a literary standpoint, again as a writer. How do you describe something that you don't know yourself? So again, seeing into the future with math. Go ahead. How can you write that? How can you describe it? What can you say about it? Not much, because you don't know it. And Isaac Asimov could have just skipped ahead into the future and said, they started psychohistory, now they've finished it and they're using it to change the future. But he didn't shy away from the challenge. What he did, the techniques he employed, were to describe certain parts of it, like specific terminology. He would say these types of equations and this gadget that they're using, and he creates the illusion that everything's functioning normally. Besides that, psychohistory represents the great work a person does in their life. So for Isaac Asimov, it would be tantamount to writing. And Harry Seldon has to devote 50 years of his life to a project he does not even know if it will ever take off. It could fail further down the line. He might not live to see its conclusion, its outturn. But it's like a gamble. If you think something is important enough, you'll work on it anyways. And hopefully, there are benefits from it. And concretely, I can say, it has helped stabilize the life of Harry Seldon. Throughout the years, in the book, so many people were hounding Harry about his psychohistory to make it serve their interests. And it seemed pretty dangerous for him at multiple times. But he just kept his head in his work, and all those important, strong people, they just kind of fell away. And he was the last man standing with his psychohistory, completed by the end. Amazing. So sometimes this work that we're not sure can sustain us, actually is sustaining us on so many levels, if it's the most important thing we can imagine. Lots of compliments to give for Foundation, but there's also a little bit of criticism. And for me, that's the idea of coincidences. Like a character having to go into a brand new world to track down another character and immediately stumbling upon them as soon as they enter a restaurant, let's say, like Rach. Or the biggest one is these mentalic powers. We see Selden struggling to convince other characters to give him funding for his project, and then out of nowhere, it turns out that his granddaughter is in a way telepathic, and she can influence others with other people like her to go along with Selden's plan. How convenient. It's like a cheat code to get whatever is necessary. So again, it's like the idea of Deus Ex Machina. It can help drive the plot forward, but at what cost? I don't know. Maybe there will be, in the spirit of mystery, some explanation further along for how these things work. Maybe it's not just all fantasy, magical powers, this mentalic side. Maybe there's a scientific explanation later on. We'll have to read and find out. My favorite part about Foundation is that it also works well as an epic. Now bear with me, I know I've mentioned so many different genres it can qualify as, but it is a classic, and that's only to be expected. But hear this out. Okay, in this world, this galaxy occupied by people, there are 25 million inhabited planets. So that gives a degree of huge vastness. And then there's these spaceships for space travel that give it an element of adventure. But the coolest part is that these books develop their own history. We have 50 years of Selden's life. In the prologue, the first two books that are together, the prologue. So that's the past. Before the main trilogy, I still don't know what that will be about. That will be the present. And then there's an epilogue. That will be the future. All this history gives a depth of detail to these books that secures the legacy for Isaac Asimov. As Harry Seldon has his psychohistory as a legacy, Isaac Asimov has his Foundation books. So I would say mission accomplished to him, and may he rest in peace.